The Week 3 NFL DFS main slate is one where there are a lot of studs with very high salaries. Kudos to FanDuel's salary department because it is tough for this week. We want to jam in Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Tony Pollard's in a great spot. There's always Patrick Mahomes in a very soft matchup. And the problem is we can't play all of them. I'd love to, but we can't. So we got to kind of siphon through the studs for today and decide which guys are the top priorities for NFL DFS in week 3, decide which ones fit in game stacks, and try to get, some salary savers we can feel good about across the board. We're going to dive in and break down this week 3 main slate right now. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. That's right here on FanDuel.com and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, joined here as always by Brandon Gdula. He is a senior managing editor of FanDuel Research. Brandon, week 3 is looking like a pretty fun one with so many good high salary guys we want to use. How you doing today?
Yeah, it is a good one. Could be better if the salaries were a little bit lower. We have some low salaries at different positions, I guess I should probably say we have some low salaries at running back that are interesting, which has kind of been the case so far this season. And that just goes against what we historically like to target. So we got to figure out how that impacts us. But, frankly, kind of drawn in by some of these tight ends, some of these receivers, these quarterbacks. Some of them are in good spots. So I might be dipping into the value range at running back yet again.
And I think that we do have routes for doing so. The question is, can we trust those guys? Because there are some spots where there are concerns for these value backs, whether it be matchup, whether it be touchdowns. There are a lot of different reasons we could have issues with some of these guys. We'll dig in, outline which guys we trust for this week, and try to get you ready for the week 3 main slate. But first, a reminder, there is effectively a listener league once again. As part of the transition to FanDuel Research, we're running free plays, free rolls every single week throughout the NFL season. If you want to get entered for the free roll for week number 3, go to FanDuel.com/research. There should be a post in there for the free roll up on the top part of the homepage. You can click on that and get yourself entered for free to play alongside other FanDuel Research consumers. Check it out all over there on FanDuel.com/research. We do still have the solo shot going every weekday with Tom Vecchio for MLB DFS here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Austin Swaim breaks down UFC each weekend as well to get you ready for UFC DFS. And of course, we have our twice weekly NFL shows, Monday recap, Thursday preview, which are also up on the FanDuel YouTube page, streaming live there and over on FanDuel TV Plus. To get FanDuel TV Plus, go to FanDuel.com/watch or download FanDuel TV Plus on Amazon Fire, Apple TV, or Roku. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options from spreads, player props, totals, and more. So visit FanDuel.com and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. First online real money wager only. $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Tennessee, and Virginia. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777. Or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700, or visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia. Call 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Help is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Let's dig in now to this week 3 NFL DFS main slate and talk about the slate overview for this week. And Brandon, when you look at this slate, what is the key thing for you, the key decision point when trying to fill out and theorize lineups for this week?
So for me, I like to have a tight core of players, first of all. And part of that with the NFL comes down to figuring out position prioritization. And so I don't like to have lineups where I build around, let's say, Justin Jefferson this week and then just completely, obliterate that lineup and then build lineups around Tony Pollard and, like have basically divergent paths with how I'm building my lineups. I like to figure out, am I trying to get overweight on Justin Jefferson, Tyreek this week? Or am I trying to do that with the tight ends? And so for me, like I'm trying to kind of replicate my lineups and tweak them as I build out more and more lineups. So I really need to figure out, is this the type of week where I see enough from low salaried quarterbacks, for example, and then I don't have to build into my player pool a lot of Patrick Mahomes. Josh Allen is like a contrarian play, that kind of stuff. So for me, I need to figure out where I feel most comfortable. And right now I'm leaning toward, once again, value running backs. We talk about, historically we've talked about not loving value running backs, but that's changed over the years as running back usage has changed a bit. There are minimal, if any, true like 100% featured backs. No one's going to play 100% of the snaps this week. No one's probably going to play 90% of the snaps this week unless that Dallas game plays close. And Tony Pollard's first half snap rate is around 70% this season. So like, I don't even think he would get there unless that game is just like back and forth. And so once you account for salary and these workloads, there are some undersalaried backs. So I think once again, I'm going to be a little bit light on the higher salaried running backs and try to get access to the tight ends and the receivers who can really alter the slate.
I think that's where I'm at as well. And the key thing for me is deciding which of those studs to prioritize. And to me, the selection set here is, I'm assuming Austin Eckler will not play. So kind of omitting him from this discussion, but Justin Jefferson against the Chargers in a game that has a very high total and tight spread, which we adore for game stacking. Tyreek Hill, potentially with no Jalen Waddle, another high total, tight enough spread there as well. Tony Pollard, not the tight. Great matchup for him. It's decide, and then Bijan Robinson, I guess you could toss in there too at $9,000 in another game that I think is pretty fun for stacking. So it's deciding who do I prioritize among that group. And to me, I think it's going to be Jefferson like number one and Hill two, which means I will be on board with you where I am likely trying to find salary savings at running back for this week. And I think that is going to be the right way to go. Let's keep up the discussion around low salary backs and talk about injuries for week number 3. The Browns signed Kareem Hunt to fill in for the injured Nick Chubb. Chubb, of course, done for the year. Reports, though, do say that Drome Ford will be the featured back still for this team. They already picked Ford over Hunt once in letting Hunt walk, and Ford stuck around. The problem is they're facing the Titans this week, and the Titans have shut down 2 consecutive lower salaried backs. Ford, $5,600. So his salary is lower than that of Joshua Kelly and Jamal Williams. And maybe there's pass catching in there, but there is the threat of Kareem Hunt lingering. So how are you viewing Drome Ford this week at $5,600?
I see a case for it if you're just selling out for a high salaried stack of, you want Keenan Allen and Justin Jefferson along with, Justin Herbert. But we talk about finding mistake erasers, and Justin Jefferson is one of those guys for sure. So making sure that if you're playing someone like Drome Ford, who he does have anecdotally a big ceiling. We saw some explosive plays from him, and I always hate when people do this. I always hate when I do it, but as if you take out that long carry he had where he almost scored, the production was solid. It wasn't anything amazing. And up in this matchup, being so tough against the Titans, it doesn't really get any worse than an overall sort of running back matchup against the Titans. So I think you have to be very selective with how much Drome Ford you use, because the path to an 11-point game is still pretty clear. So maybe I'm lower on him than you are. And this is coming from someone who wanted him a lot on my season long teams. It's someone like I'm there on.
Yeah.
It's just specifically the matchup.
Yeah.
You don't really. He's not gonna be Nick Chubb.
Yeah.
You know, it's just.
And you're taking the right approach and talking about his ceiling. His floor will be fine, but as we know here, floor is an oversold aspect of daily fantasy. You want ceiling. You want guys, using Ford may get you a mistake eraser, but it also is one less slot in your roster to use someone who could erase other mistakes. Ford, I do think, will be pretty clearly back here. 17 routes for him in week number 3 or 2. Pierre Strong ran 8, 16 carries, 4 targets for Ford in that game. So I think he'll be the lead back. It's just that's a really tough spot to be in for him facing the Titans. So I think of the 3 value backs who face the Titans between Williams, Kelly, and Ford, Ford is the most appealing because his salary is lowest. And I trust this offense. Well, I trust this rushing offense more. I should rephrase. I trust this rushing offense more. I think that what I'd rather do, though, is Amari Cooper's salary is $600 higher than Ford's. So I can get a value player on the Browns and have him be in an infinitely better matchup than what Ford has. So, like, if I'm going to save salary in the Browns, I think I'd rather go with Amari Cooper than go with Ford. I'll have Ford in my player pool, but I want to make sure I have a very low lid on it, 15 to 20%, because I respect the Titans. I think I'd rather just go a little bit harder at Cooper instead.
Yeah, and just to clarify here, the Titans against running backs this season are first in rushing success rate allowed by all of the metrics, but they're basically 20 percentage points better than the league average in success rate allowed against running backs. So again, there's a chance he just breaks a long one, but even if you give him 18, 20 carries, I don't know if that's really tied to 120 rushing yards because of how good this defense has been. So that's my main concern. And while yes, a featured role, 80% snap rate, maybe at a $5,600 salary, sometimes it's like you're overthinking it not to use it. But
sure,
what's the upside? And the upside is some long carries, maybe some touchdowns. Try to get this offense, because Nick Chubb is basically the entire identity of that offense.
He's the best running back in football.
And maybe they really, if they get near the goal lines, let's get Ford some touchdowns and really make everyone believe in that. And it's the kind of stuff we don't really talk about or think about. I could see that happening.
Sure.
But my final question here is, what percentage of your lineups would you have Ford on? Because I think it's probably because it's probably gonna be lower than. Well, there's a lot of value backs.
I don't think he'll be very high rostered because William on YouTube saying salary could be 0 and I wouldn't use him against Titans. I think that's fair. I think that's going to be a discussion point throughout this week, especially given we saw with the past couple of backs. So I don't think he's going to be that popular as a result of that. And because we have other value backs there, I don't think he'll be that popular.
I think we'll be around 25%.
Okay, that's fair. Also, final note on the Titans, that's not just a 2-week sample. I mean, it is the one you cited, but they were good last year too. Yeah. I have my model blends a prior with what we've seen so far this year, and they're still easily first in rush defense, projected rush defense. So they're very good. Speaking of Cooper, he did his practice Wednesday with shoulder and groin injuries. Cooper played through the groin injury last week and looked pretty good. A shoulder injury is new. The Browns facing the Titans here, they funnel work towards the passing game. So I still feel like I'm pretty good with Cooper as long as he gets into full practice by Friday. Any other interest in the passing game for you here?
Not specifically. I think Cooper's the guy.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. I toyed with the idea of considering Deshaun Watson as a salary saver, but I think he's a bit too close to Lamar Jackson, Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff to feel good about that, despite the fact I do like his rushing work a lot. The Vikings acquired Cam Akers from the Rams for a 2026 pick swap. Cool. Akers has struggled this year, but so has Alexander Mattison. Akers also played under Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell with the Rams back in the day. We don't know whether Akers will be active, but we'll talk about this backfield in the bookmaker section. The Saints are thin at running back with Jamal Williams now dealing with a hamstring injury. Alvin Kamara is still suspended. Kendre Miller got in a full practice on Wednesday. I think they hate Tony Jones. I think that they only used him on like their pass rate was bananas. Like they came out with a game plan on Monday saying we want to pound this rock, and then it's like, we can't because our only option is Tony Jones and Taysom Hill. So I think they hate Tony Jones. Kendre Miller, full practice Wednesday. Salaries 46, facing the Packers. Any interest in a Kendre Miller dart throw in a thin backfield?
I'm gonna say no.
Okay. I have interest.
How much?
I don't know. I kind of want some more reports to come out. The good thing is the Saints have very good beat reporters around the team. Nick Underhill is like one of like a top tier beat reporter. So we'll probably get decent info on like what to expect from them by Sunday. So I feel like we'll have a good read by Sunday. I don't have a good read right now, but I will say my antennas are up because low salary at running back. Packers not that good against the rush. I think the Saints offense is fine. I know they haven't lit it up so far, but I really don't mind them. And I think that like the analog here is the Zach Moss situation. Zach Moss doesn't play week 1. Deion Jackson looks like booty, and Evan Hull gets hurt, and they immediately give Zach Moss 100%, 98% snap rate. I don't know if we'll get there for Kendre Miller, but I would not be shocked if he immediately gets a good amount of run. He practiced a good amount last week too, so I think the injury's okay. But like my antenna's up. I think that's the proper phrasing for me.
I think where I'm always coming from with Saints running backs is that this team just gives the ball to anyone near the goal line.
That's very true.
And I hate that.
Absolutely fair.
And even at a $4,600 salary, an 8,500 yard game with no touchdowns doesn't necessarily move the needle unless you're, again, using that salary specifically to get like this weird combination that almost nobody else is having of like Jefferson and Tyreek, and they both go for like 200 yards. Like Miller over Ford.
To be determined.
Okay.
But like, I would say that's something I'm receptive to, just out of curiosity. Let's see here. I remember the buttons to push. So if you go with Kendre Miller with Tyreek Hill and Justin Jefferson, and let's put in the Dolphins defense. 64-40 left for if you still do quarterback, running back, flex, receiver, tight end. But like if you
I don't know. We'll talk about quarterback upside and salary later. I don't even know if that's enough.
Fair enough. I'm gonna stop building here because I'm gonna go down a really bad path. I think it's at least digging into. Though.
And it's not like if you play Miller, you have to have both of those guys or anything. It's just you really got to think about how it impacts your lineup to potentially, based on what we know and based on what we've seen historically from certain teams, that someone's not getting you 25 FanDuel points or 20 FanDuel points even at a low salary.
I'm interested. Again, antennas are up. That's what I'll say. Justice Hill dealing with turf toe, which could hold him out for Baltimore's week 3 match with the Colts. The Ravens had Melvin Gordon on the roster last week. He was active, but did not play a single snap. They also signed Kenyon Drake, who was with the team last year, and Drake knows it's offense. Well, actually, no, he was different offense because it's Todd Monken now. But let's say that Hill can't go. We've got Drake and Gordon in town. Any interest in Gus Edwards is $6,200.
Talk about another backfield where there's not a lot of single game upside. I'd consider him, but I'm considering a lot. It's same as last week. I'm considering a lot of names in like the 6,000 range at running back. And when you're considering 5 or 6 guys, you're not really considering anyone to be like the guy. Now, Zach Moss, I think, stands out for both of us, but
okay, cool.
At a certain point, you're kind of rolling the dice. So it goes back to what I said at the top of the show. If I just commit to trying to figure out the value running backs, I'd probably just be really, really overweight on certain quarterbacks and receivers, and just kind of build my lineups and tweak them and filter through these value backs and kind of hope for the right combo. So where are you with this backfield?
If I'm ranking him out compared to other value backs, like let's assume Justice Hill sits, I'd rank Moss higher still. I know opposing side of a game where the Ravens are pretty heavily favored, but like Moss probably more likely to get passing game work. I think that's pretty enticing. Raheem Mostert at 66 as well. I like him more than Gus at 62 personally. He's pretty close to Jibreel Gibbs. Ramondre Stevenson is there. So like, I don't think it's like egregious if you want to consider Gus, but I think I'd rank him below all those guys I just named, which probably means I wouldn't get there, but like I wouldn't talk people out of him, I guess is what I would say, but not really there personally, especially with Drake now signing. It's a little bit concerning to me. Same team. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I say that same thing a lot when we talk about golf. Is like I consider this golfer, but that's different than like wanting to play someone.
Correct. Same team. Odell Beckham missed practice Wednesday. Doesn't seem like he's going to be out this week. I think he'll play, I guess, but it is noteworthy. Any value for you in the Ravens pass catchers with Odell a bit banged up? Also, apparently, maybe dating Kim Kardashian. I don't know if that factors into the model, but
wouldn't for me. I'm sure it would for you.
There it is, baby.
Yeah.
Not sure if that's a positive or a negative bump, but we'll figure that out.
You're the narrative guy, so you would know. I mean, do like Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers work as getting value or like being value plays? Because
I think that they're both. I think that Andrews is fairly salaried at 74, and Flowers is a bit under salaried at 63. So yeah, I think that it makes me feel better about those two guys. I think is the way I'd phrase it.
So then, I would say Zay probably is the guy. Andrews got a lot of targets in his return. Love to see that, but Zay.
And I'm going to use Lamar, so I'll need to use those two guys. If it means stacking's easier and I can just focus on those two, I'll take that. Austin Eckler missed practice Wednesday with his ankle injury. We'll talk about Joshua Kelly in the bookmakers section. Amon-Ra St. Brown missed practice Wednesday. He's dealing with potentially turf toe. He played through it for the end of Sunday's game, and he had like a catch either in overtime or before overtime where he looked really good, I thought. The Lions, unlikely to have David Montgomery due to a thigh injury. We'll talk about them in the bookmaker section. Aaron Jones missed another practice Wednesday due to his hamstring injury. Christian Watson was limited and appears on track to return. If Jones is out again, should we consider AJ Dillon, now that his salary is down to 63? And how about the pass catchers if Watson is back?
It's another name in that salary range where you don't
need to consider it.
But like it comes back to like what's the single game upside? The salary's low, but it's not so low that you're getting like free access to Justin Jefferson or anything. So I'm out. As far as the pass catchers go, I think the jury remains out on how sticky the Jordan Love efficiency is going to be.
Correct.
And this team is having a pretty lengthy list of players getting targets. So it goes back to the upside. I don't really know if it's there. And so I'm probably out. I think I don't need the value this week at receiver.
I agree. Both Jalen Waddle and Savon Ahmed missed practice on Wednesday for the Dolphins. We'll talk about them in the bookmakers section. DK Metcalf is expected to play this week despite dealing with a rib injury. He returned to the game on Sunday. Pete Carroll said Wednesday he expects Metcalf out there. Any interest in DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett facing a Panthers defense that is missing some key pieces in the secondary?
I don't like mind this game as a whole, but I don't know how you bring it back. And if I can't bring it back, I don't tend to love receivers.
Yeah.
And I have enough receivers that I like to want to get to that I don't know if I'm going to jam in some one-offs, even though these two guys, I've probably said single game upside like 1,000 times, but these two can be the wide receiver one any week, and it wouldn't surprise anybody. But am I too low on them?
No, because I think that like I'm okay with a receiver where I don't like the opposing side if it's like a lower salary. Like I'm not super into like any Titans, but I like Amari Cooper a lot at 62. So like that's fine. But 62 is a lot different from Metcalf at 74, Lockett at 73. So I think I'd need a bit more juice on the opposing side to get super jazzed about the Seahawks passing game. Logan Thomas seems likely to miss week 3 after a pretty nasty concussion on Sunday. The Commanders 6.5 point underdogs at home against the Bills. Would an absence for Thomas boost the appeal in Jahan Dotson or Terry McLaurin for you?
So like I said a couple weeks ago, I guess week 1, I'm trying not to look at salaries and then make my decisions based on salaries. So if I just look at like the target shares, I know they could climb. This team just is spreading it out. There's not a whole lot there. And now seeing McLaurin's salary at 71.
Well, he's
I think
not the target here.
It's
He's
Dotson.
not the mark, baby. Jahan Dotson, $5,800. Like his target shares, yeah, I mean it's 19%. Only one deep target so far, but last year we saw him get a lot of deep work. He can get red zone work too. So although he hasn't gotten the high leverage work yet, that's something that like he will get long term. So I think that like Dotson is very, very interesting at 58. As far as like, if you think about like receivers in that range who have upside, he fits that mold. You know, there's yardage juice there. He can score touchdowns. His quarterback is playing decent so far. Like, I think that's enough.
Yeah, he's one of the biggest overperformers in terms of touchdowns last year. And I know you said he has one deep target, which for you is 16 plus yards downfield. He has 6 downfield targets
immediate stuff
of 10 plus yards.
Yeah.
8.8 yard ADOT. Yeah. I would say that receivers really, really fascinating this week. There are plays throughout the salary tier.
Mm-hmm.
It gets a little tricky below 6,000. So Dotson deserves a shot. That's a good call.
Okay. The Chiefs were without Isaiah Pacheco, Kadarius Toney, and Richie James at practice on Wednesday. Pacheco has a hamstring contusion. That's a bruise, right? I don't know. These are big words for me.
So.
Toney dealing with a toe injury. Would removing either Pacheco or Toney increase your interest in the non-Kelsey pieces for this Chiefs offense?
It's just going to lead to more work for like everybody, and it's going to get all spread out, especially as big favorites. I think it's just, I don't really think it's there.
Like who I can't answer the question who benefits. Like I can't, what's Sky Moore's salary? He's 56. Like that's fine, but like I still wouldn't be like slobbering to get there. Let's say Pacheco is okay, because again, it's a hamstring contusion, which is weird. Would you have interest there at 57 against a terrible Bears defense?
I feel like, he's never going to play like an 85, 90% snap rate, right, at least in the regular season. They're not going to give him tons of work. They're going to spread it out. He's going to come off the field. If I had him in season long and I just lost Nick Chubb, I'd be like, let's go and plug him in, feel good. I don't really know if he's the type of play in DFS right now with this workload to want to, construct lineups around. So I'm out.
Pacheco or Drome Ford?
Pacheco.
Okay. Pacheco or Kendre Miller?
I feel so if Miller's the only running back, his snap rate can't be worse than Pacheco's, which is like capped
50.
at like 50. So accounting for that salary, I'd probably just go Miller.
Okay. I would need some positive reports on Miller, but I think we might get them. So if we get the positive reports, I'll be there. Okay. Let's dig in now to our bookmaker section for week number 3 and talk about the big shootout in Minneapolis for the Vikings and the Chargers. Total there has come down 1 point, but is still at 53.5. No other game higher than 48.5. Spread is pretty tight here, bouncing back and forth between the two sides. The Chargers now favored by 1.5. And like we talk a lot about how we can have concerns around certain games for stacking. I don't have a lot around this game, honestly, which could be concerning because both these teams are the dumbest teams in football. Like 31 and 32 as far as like intelligence. Like they just play the dumbest games, but they can move the ball. Both defenses have struggled to open this year. So how are you feeling about this game?
Play them all. Gary Oldman game. Shout out to Al Smizzle.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's been a while.
Good reference. I was like, where do I remember that phrase from? Once he said, yeah, okay. Yeah. Play all the dudes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a 2 QB game. Love Justin Herbert. Love Kirk Cousins. We'll talk about Cousins in terms of, fitting the sort of upside mold. for this week, despite not rushing the ball much at all. Assuming no Eckler, I'd play Kelly. Talk to me about Alexander Mattison real quick.
No,
Okay.
you do that. That's
Okay.
Don't put that evil on me.
So then Justin Jefferson, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Jordan Addison, all viable.
Addison, I think his salary is too high at 68. So it's a question of how much juice do we give him as a result of the game environment? Because like he's still running a bit behind KJ Osborne, I believe, at least based on Thursday night snaps, but also like it's his first 2 games of his career, so like that could change very quickly, especially because he's playing very well.
Yep.
So like he's probably earned more work in that offense.
Sure.
So I don't know. I wouldn't like you sometimes ask like how many lineups would you need to get there. That's like a 30 to 40 lineup, I think. Just because there are other receivers I like a lot in that range in his work. Like he did play 71% of the snaps on Thursday, which is pretty good. I know he's behind Osborne, but like that's still pretty good. So I feel like I'd rather just go Jefferson and Hawkinson though, and just kind of load up on them and then, try to hit the right combos around them.
I'm going to have enough of the quarterbacks in this game where I would just want to filter in multiple just options with game stacks. So he's going to be in the player pool. Would you play KJ Osborne?
It's $5,600. Probably. So like when I was doing RIP to you, the salary scroll on Monday, I was like, I guess I could go KJ Osborne. No, I shouldn't. And I talked myself out of it like immediately. He has 6 targets per game, but that's a 14% target share. Maybe that's sticky because like they can't run because they're bad at that. Addison does have a 31% deep target share despite the limited snaps. So like maybe I should be higher on him, but just a higher salary than I'd like. So I probably don't want to get to Osborne. I think I kind of want to keep it tight here. Go Herbert with Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, and then go Cousins. I'm not totally sure I'll get there. I should, but I can't say 100% that I will. But I think I'd rather go with like Hawkinson and Jefferson and just kind of maybe some Addison and use that as like just make my core here tight within game stacks.
No arguments. I'm just going to say if I'm rounding out lineups and I have 68 or 56, those 2 guys in this game environment have more appeal than, again, some one-offs in like bad games.
Where do you feel about Addison compared to Amari Cooper at 62?
I prefer Cooper for like just this sort of head-to-head kind of lineup. But if I'm looking for true ceiling and thinking about game stacks and how it all works out, odds are my top lineups are just going to be built around these quarterbacks or this game. And Addison, because the salary is, objectively too high, it's going to keep people off of him.
Yeah.
And he has, I'll say it again, big single game upside based on how good he is. So
that's fair. I get that.
I'll take it.
I would not talk to you about Alexander Mattison, but I will talk to you about Joshua Kelly. If we assume Eckler sits, Kelly's salary is $6,100, and obviously didn't do anything last week, but that's to be expected in that matchup. His snap rate was 79%, and I think they've shown they trust him both in the work they gave him in week 1, but also the snap rate they gave him in week 2. He had a target in that game, I think, like on the first drive. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Like maybe he can get around this matchup, and then they never threw to him again the rest of the game. So I think that Kelly, like if you're talking to me about the backs in the 6,000 range, so talking about Mostert, Ramondre, Zach Moss, I would be tempted to put Joshua Kelly 1 of that group. I would probably put Zach Moss a hair above him, but like I think that Kelly's in that tier for the 6,000 range. How do you settle in on him at 61?
Yeah, I like the underlying workload that we saw could have been better, but because it wasn't better, the salary's low. So, just rest up, Austin, get some, much deserved
That's right.
rest here, because I don't want to consider him in this game environment, frankly. But
coming off an injury at $9,800, he would definitely have 5 touchdowns.
yeah, he would. He won't practice all week.
Right,
Game time
right.
decision, and then
Right.
play.
There'll be a report pregame that his ankle is like barely like hanging on by a thread,
61% snap rate, 4 touchdowns. Yeah.
Yep.
But no, Kelly's a great call. And again, I'm going to stack this game as many ways as I can almost. So based on that, I'm going to have more exposure to him, even if I maybe in a vacuum would rather get to Ramondre or Mostert or Moss.
And single word, Madison, yay or nay? I shouldn't have put the single word disclaimer on it.
Nay.
Okay. Were you going to say maybe? Was that like I thought I heard an M in there first.
Well, again, I'm just going to stack this game, and everyone clearly does not care for Alexander Matt, or some people, I should say.
Yeah.
Which is horrible to think about.
Yeah.
But I could, I'm going to say yay because he's game stacks only, and I can say that because.
Would that change if Akers is active or no? Because I think Akers stinks too. So like it's.
I don't think that, especially coming off that game and stuff that happened after
that's
that
what
game,
I thought too.
I kind of feel like
they're
going to try to get Madison
throw him a bone.
Yeah.
Especially in a great matchup. So maybe I should be higher at like 4 game stacks. Yes, I'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm going to stack this game. So my answer to that after, 2 minutes is yay.
Okay. I'm yayish. Yayish is one word. Let's go to another high total with a tight spread. That is in Detroit. Lions 3.5-point favorites against the Falcons. Total is 46.5. I took the over when it was 45.5 earlier on this week. I think I still show value. Let me check. I have the total for this game, I think like 49. Yeah, 49.5. So still high. Second highest of the week. So what could go wrong there? The Falcons passing game sucks. They don't throw the ball at all, and they're not super efficient when they do. But Detroit has plenty of guys we want to use, potentially some injuries to whittle things down a bit there. So is this a game you feel good stacking?
Do I feel good stacking? No. And the reason for that is the non-Detroit offense in this matchup.
I love the way you phrase that.
Not naming names, but it's not Detroit. Bijan Robinson is phenomenal, and I love watching him play. Salary of 9,000 leaves really no room for error, which is a positive if you just look at it from again, similar to the Addison conversation. Well, he's not going to fit the optimizers. The value is going to look worse because the projected median outcome isn't going to look as great. But this dude's got multi-touchdown upside if he has at least 2 touches because he could just house anything. But as far as stacking goes, I can't say that it's really stackable because if I'm stacking it, I'm kind of throwing my hands up and saying, sure, Drake London can have a decent game, or sure, Kyle Pitts is.
I was clicking the tab.
I can say that, but that's again a little bit different than saying that I want to stack it. So I guess technically it is stackable, but with a lot of conditions on that.
How exposed do you want to be to Robinson at $9,000? Because it's a very high salary in a slate where you want to get to some high salaried receivers. So there is a pretty lofty opportunity cost in using Robinson. So where do you settle in as far as how much you want of him?
I mean, it's a 1 QB game because Goff's in the consideration set. And if I'm playing a Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown stack, I would consider it, but I think he might be game stacks only because I really want this game to be the game, and I'm kind of banking on it being the game for Robinson to pay off that salary.
Yeah.
I know you can't just, again, find $400, but Pollard or Bijan Robinson this week, in a vacuum, in a non-game stack contextual conversation.
No Tyler Algier in that backfield.
Right. That's the biggest concern is I think Robinson might. I give everyone the Aaron Jones comp, but this is different.
So I gave him that comp after week 1. I agree
Yeah.
with you wholly. And then he went out and just torched.
He did, yes. But he has that, Algiers involved in the red zone. This team runs the ball so much that other players are going to get involved naturally. So I wouldn't talk a single person out of playing Bijan Robinson, and I will play him a little bit, but he's not going to be someone that I go out of my way to plug in first in my lineups because of the salary and because of the potential concerns with the red zone work right now.
Different comp for you. And this one's going to sound very stupid because they're the most different players of all time. I think he's similar to like old school Derrick Henry, where you kind of ask, what are the odds he burned me for not using him? And kind of use that as a way to guide your roster rate. And I would say when you consider Algier, I think the odds he burns me for not using him are around like 15%. And that fits with like game stacks only for me. So that's probably the guiding light I would use there. The opposing side is more fun. Actually, I'm not going to use Drake London. I'll say that quick. I refuse. But I'll use Pitts because tight end is the worst. And it'd be so funny if he scored this week. It's literally just because they think it'd be funny. That's the only reason. That's the best justification I can give you for Pitts. It would be funny if he went off.
Don't say that. Don't say that. We can build a case for Kyle Pitts, but yeah,
I mean, he runs a lot of routes. Like that's the case. And he's in a game that I want to stack.
Runs a lot of routes. Oh man. 4 targets per game. But a catch rate over expectation of minus 20.6 percentage points. So
is that on him or is that on other factors?
So we don't know, but those 4 targets could be leading to more than 29.5 yards per game. So that's the case at such a low salary in a game that could be a bit of a shootout. And I haven't checked weather this morning as of Thursday, but as of like Wednesday afternoon, there were some windy games potentially.
They're windy games, but they're all bad games. So if I sort by total, like my total in my model, there are 5 games with a wind speed of at least 10 miles per hour. 4 of them are the 4 lows totals for me. That's a correlation equals causation situation because the wind is in the model. But like it's the quarterbacks there are Josh Allen, Sam Howell, Deshaun Watson, Ryan Tannehill, Jordan Love, Derek Carr, Zach Wilson, Mac Jones. Like it's not impacting a lot as far as like teams we actually want to use.
Right. But it still takes out potential value plays at tight end, for example. So
I think my approach at tight end is, am I stacking this game? Can I use a tight end in it? Cool. That'll probably be Laporta more often than it is Kyle Pitts, but like, I think that's the way I want to go. Like, that's why I'll get to Hawkinson is because and I'll get to Andrews because like, I'm just going to use like, let the game stack guide where I go at tight end or the quarterback stack, etc. Let's talk about the other side as far as running back. Jahmyr Gibbs likely getting a bump here with no David Montgomery. Looking at the Lions after Montgomery left on Sunday, snaps were 17-10 in favor of Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs finished that game with 9 targets, which was a very good number. And he did split work with Craig Reynolds. But I feel like we saw enough there to feel okay about Gibbs at $7,000. He is fine from a salary perspective, getting exposure to this game. He's going to get targets. And I know people say that's more of a full PPR thing, but on FanDuel, pass catching matters a lot as well. So I'm going to go back to Gibbs this week. I'm going to regret that at some point. But I do feel like just based on the pass catching, based on the bump in projected early down work, I think there's enough here to go back to him. What say you on Jahmyr Gibbs at $7,000, assuming there is no Montgomery?
Yeah, if there's no Montgomery, he's one of my favorite plays. Mm-hmm. The salary's there. Good game environment overall. We're talking about it in this section for a reason. Indoors, we know that the potential is there. His rushing metrics haven't been great yet, but it's a 2-game sample, and I would be astonished if we look at the end of the season and say, well, I guess he's just not very good. Yeah. And he has been targeted on the second highest route, or targeted on the second highest percentage of his routes among all running backs. He's like 0.1 points behind Javonte Williams. So he's basically just getting used in a very unique way. And anytime we get a legitimate pass catcher at running back, you got to take advantage, because if there's no Montgomery for multiple weeks, which maybe is the case, Gibbs' salary is probably not going to be lower than this until Montgomery returns.
That's fair. That's a good way to look at it too, is whose salary is lower than it will be going for. That's actually a really good way to look at it. Let's talk about the pass catchers very quickly here, the non-Falcons guys, because not a lot of passes to catch there. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 79, has this turf toe injury. I think if he's a full go by Friday, that salary is way low. Like, might be hard to get to in Jefferson lineups, but like, I feel like I want to try to make it work. Reynolds is too high at $7,000. Like, what are we doing? So to me, it's about Amon-Ra and Laporta. What about you for the Lions pass catchers?
Did that happen for Reynolds in like other weeks too?
I don't know, man. I love Josh Reynolds, and I'm just sad I can't use him, so I'm tilting.
Yeah, I love Amon-Ra St. Brown, assuming he's full in practice by Friday and is not limited. I think that based on his like market shares right now, they're kind of low. Feels like he's been in and out of the lineup. I know for a fact he's gone in and out of the lineup sometimes, but don't know quite how often. But everything's kind of limited. And once again, he's going to be an 8,000 receiver, once he's healthy. So,
and he still looked good despite the fact he's been banged up. So I value that personally. Final game in the bookmaker section is the Broncos at the Dolphins. Second highest total here, back up to 48.5, was briefly 47.5, back up to 48.5. Dolphins favored by 6.5. So the Broncos implied total is still above 20. We know to use Tyreek Hill. Like, no discussion there. Raheem Mostert, probably pretty interesting at 66 as well, but Jalen Waddle's injury could open up questions around Tua Tagovailoa because of decreased efficiency, and the Broncos' market shares are vomit. How are you viewing this game for DFS?
Yeah, Mostert and Hill, two of the biggest overperformers in terms of FanDuel points versus expected FanDuel points, but they have the ability to make that happen, so I'm not going to question that too much. The only question is how much Hill can you get, really? I think that's the main concern, not is he viable? He's very viable. Mostert, should he just be the play in like the low, like Raheem Mostert in this offense, or Zach Moss if you're building like one lineup? Shouldn't it just be Mostert at this point?
Yeah.
I mean, offense.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's fair. Because like Savon Ahmed's banged up. I think they'll eventually get A-Chain more involved, but like I think their actions kind of say that he's not there yet. He will be eventually, probably, but like he's not there yet. Mostert last week, 18 carries, 1 target in that game with Ahmed leaving early. 2 out of 6 red zone chances. So his red zone role is fine. Snap rate's pretty good at 72 and 74%. So probably should go Mostert. I think that's fair.
What about the other any other pass catchers here for Miami that you'd be looking at?
Well, we just got a question over on YouTube from One Eye Jack Productions. Can I interest you in Durham Smite this week? If you go to my Slack archive to Brandon from 9:30 this morning, it was just a screenshot of Durham Smythe. Salary's 48, runs a lot of routes. Tight end is the worst. If I'm just using tight ends in games that I'm looking to stack, I'll have stacks this game. So I do feel like Smythe is viable. It's not because I think that Smythe is like good. It's because tight end is the worst, and I might as well use a guy on an offense we like who's missing a key piece and runs a lot of routes for $4,800. So I'm going to use him. Like, yeah, I'll use him. What about you?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. But you said you want to use tight ends in games you're going to stack. So
yeah,
how are you stacking this game?
It's probably Javonte Williams at 61. He hasn't looked very good so far, but he's getting passing game work, which I like. 6 and 3 targets in the 2 games for a total of 19 yards. My gosh.
Yeah, he's the player with a slightly higher target per route rate than Jahmyr Gibbs.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I didn't realize that. They had said in week 1 that he was on a snap count, and he played 28 snaps there. I believe he played the exact same number in week 2 as well. So that didn't rise, but he's $6,100. I feel like like maybe you go to Jude the dude at 61, but like I think the Broncos are going to be a nightmare from a target share perspective this year. So
Yeah.
I think it's really more about Javonte. And like when I'm talking about Smythe, it's more so I'm using that passing game.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so like because I'm using Hill, it makes sense to use Smythe. I think it's more so than like game stacks. I'd
Any
probably
Tua then?
What's
Because I'm
that?
not using any Broncos. I don't think there's a case to be made for it, frankly.
I think with Waddle,
Unless it's you're playing Tyreek's going to go nuts and Javonte's going to get like 10 targets.
yeah. I think with Tua, I would need Waddle to go, which I don't think he will. Just because like there are other guys who don't run a lot who I like more this week. Cousins is there, Goff is there, Herbert doesn't run a lot, so I like him more. So I think Tua probably not going to crack the player pool for me, assuming Waddle doesn't go.
Yeah, I'm not quite there. But,
Yeah.
there are, frankly, quarterbacks on the slate. Like, would it surprise me if Tua threw for 350 and 4?
No.
But
And again, that's a threshold for a non-rushing quarterback to be in a perfect lineup is 350 yards and 4 touchdowns. I feel like it's more likely we get that from Goff, Cousins. I know. I see you. I feel like it's more likely to come from one of them. Playing indoors too, which helps. Not as much humidity for them as we'll have in Miami this week, which I think works both ways. It hurts defense too, so it's not like this game will go under because of humidity, but like I just like domes. So let's dig in now to our trends discussion for week number 3. And Brandon, you alluded to this before. You're talking about quarterback upside, the tools we need to find upside at that position. So what did you see when you dug into the data?
yeah, so I know sometimes our trends can get kind of like complicated and then hard to apply. So I try to keep this one a little bit simpler and look at like the actual hit rates of quarterbacks based just on salary because perfect lineup sometimes can have the one quarterback at a low salary who had a big game and that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how you should be building your lineups, but salary of course can tell us a lot about production. And I think this week specifically because we have someone over 9,000 with a salary of Patrick Mahomes at 92. It's fairly rare, all things considered. Josh Allen, tough matchup, but boy, he's got upside in any matchup. Justin Fields might be getting a little more carefree. That whole team it's got some stuff going on. Who knows what's true, what's not. But quarterbacks in the games that we're talking about already is like game stacks. If Waddle's back, Tua's got that upside. So again, I just wanted to kind of like keep this one simple and look at the probabilities because it's going to be tempting to look for low salary quarterbacks any week, but there is a bit of a risk. So obviously there's a clear relationship between salary and FanDuel points scored. And I bucketed quarterbacks into salary tiers since the start of 2018. So if you're 82 or 88, you're just an $8,000 quarterback. I just kind of kept it simple like that. So since 2018, quarterbacks with a salary of 9,000 or higher had a 25 FanDuel point game 40% of the time. That number for the $8,000 quarterbacks is 30%, and it's 15% for 7K quarterbacks. So that means your odds of getting 25 FanDuel points from an 8K QB versus a 7K QB is basically double. As far as the 6,000 range goes, it's 5%, which makes sense because there's just not a whole lot of high upside plays that are just thrust into great matchups. That gets accounted for. But that means that a quarterback at a 9K salary is 8 times more likely to get to 25 FanDuel points. And so shouldn't really shock anyone. But we know that quarterback, especially for people who come from a season-long background, know that you can kind of play matchups and you can account for that. The salaries do fluctuate based on matchups, so it's a little bit tricky sometimes. But if you turn to value, like projected value, and by value, I mean your FanDuel points divided by your salary, times 1,000 to kind of make it an actual number that's easy to think about. you look at value. Value should be probably something that everyone who plays DFS already knows, but for anyone who doesn't, that's a way that you can look at things. So 21 FanDuel points at a $7,000 salary is 3 times value, 3x value. So it'd be the same as 24 FanDuel points at an 8,000 salary. 3 times value is pretty rare to find. At QB, you're probably only considering options with like a 2.25 or maybe a 2.5 projection. 2.5 is really strong. It's usually like the top 5 quarterbacks on a given slate. So I'll cherry pick it and stick to even just the 2.5x projected quarterbacks based on numberFire's historical projections. So these are the best QBs in these salary tiers. So we're weeding out the guys we're not really considering in the first place. As far as the well-projected quarterbacks go, the rates that they got to 25 plus FanDuel points at 9,000, it's 43%. So it's 3 percentage points higher than the full sample. At 8,000, it's 35%. So that's 5 points higher than the full sample. 7K, it's 20%. So another 5 points above the full sample. And at 6K, it's still 5%. So it's the same. So I say this because like we talked about Anthony Richardson just in week 1, saying we're not going to get quarterbacks in this salary tier very often with a 6 in front of their salary. But other than that, replaceability gets really hard and it's still pretty predictable. So players with a $7,000 salary have paths to ceilings whenever there's a path to a ceiling. But the names that fit this week in the 7,000 range are Kirk Cousins, Trevor Lawrence, and nearly Jared Goff. He's projected for like 2.45 with his value at numberFire right now. I still think that, yes, you can cherry pick or sorry, you can nitpick like Mahomes and Allen, Tua, Justin Fields right now, but these guys have big ceilings. And so if you're going to look at a slate like this, to me, there's like 10 quarterbacks that I could consider. A few of them float to the top, but whenever it comes to quarterbacks and like finding upside, you generally have to allocate salary. And that's tricky because we have Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, the tight ends this week. So how are you viewing quarterback as a whole? Because we kind of just talk about that toward the player pick section with quarterback. Do you think there's a lot of high upside guys, or are you kind of ruling out a Mahomes, a Josh Allen this week in terms of upside, and you're actually considering, a Jared Goff, or I know you're a little bit lower on Kirk Cousins, but how are you viewing like
lower
them?
On Cousins? I'm just annoyed. I don't want to use Cousins when I know he'll be popular, which he will this week.
Sure.
Like if I look at RotoGrinders roster rate projections, Cousins is number 1. Jared Goff is around 1%. So if I'm going to get that kind of gap, I'd rather use Goff. I also don't know why Goff is so low, but that's like, what's the difference between Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff, assuming Amon-Ra St. Brown plays?
One's in the best game of the week against a team that can actually score, and one is against a team that wants to get out of there.
Lions.
Get out of there.
You could score on the Lions.
Get out of there as quickly as possible. That's the Falcons' way.
Their pace is like slightly below average. You run pace numbers. I use your pace numbers from my model. It has this totals being super high.
They dog. They want to just run the ball.
Doesn't matter. It's still like a non-terrible pace. I think this game goes over. So like I don't know. Overall, getting back to your question, for quarterback this week, I feel like Mahomes and Allen can still torch you for not using them, but like the odds they do so are lower because of script for Mahomes and matchup for Allen. So like I'm more okay spending down, but I'd rather spend down for Lamar Jackson. Like I think it comes down to that. So I am more receptive to pocket passers than usual. But that does not mean that I'm going to rank them first. I'm going to rank Lamar first. That's the one thing I am certain about this week is Lamar Jackson will be my number 1 quarterback. Like a single entry lineup, I'm using Lamar. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah. And again, I think what I also just found in this is obviously overall higher salaries correlate with higher FanDuel point outputs, but someone like Justin Herbert, probably should be considered like a huge tier above. I don't want to say Kirk Cousins because he's very close to getting to the 8,000 salary. But like, if we're open to, I don't know, Trevor Lawrence, Jared Goff, like obviously there's a salary gap there, but like, I think historically I would underrate someone like Herbert because I just like Lamar, and then I'll try to get down and match Herbert. But again, like these guys are like twice as likely to get a big game as someone in the 7,000 range, even whenever you look just at the best projected in the 7,000 range. So
I do like Herbert too,
yeah.
but I like Lamar a lot. I think those are my player picks this week. Anyway, my first trend is talking about the red zone workloads for running backs, because I did a trend last week on talking about stickiness of running back stats between week 1 and week 2. And the stickiest stat was snap rate, obviously, but the second stickiest is actually red zone workload. So now that we have 2 weeks of data, I wanted to dig into the red zone workloads of backs for this week's main slate and identify positives and negatives. For this, I'm looking at the percentage of team carries or targets a back has gotten inside the 20. So this accounts for like pass rate and stuff like that. So you throw a lot and the back's not getting targets, that's accounted for in this number. It's not perfect because goal line data is obviously better, but that's a very small sample. So it's a good fill-in, I think. And it does raise some red flags for certain guys. In general, an elite mark for a red zone workload is 45%. Anything above 40% is very good. Derrick Henry, 50% through 2 weeks. That's a positive. If you want to use Amari Cooper and bring it back, you can do so. Tony Pollard, 44% red zone workload. Kenneth Walker, Brian Robinson, and Zach Moss all top 40% in their relevant games. So Pollard, Walker, Robinson, Moss, and Henry are the green flags as far as red zone workload. More pertinent for me, though, is the guys who haven't got much red zone work. The 2 big ones are Travis Etienne and James Cook. Etienne, a 15% red zone share through 2 games. Cook is at 4%. That's 1 out of 25 through 2 games. James Cook's snap rate in the red zone is 32%. It goes down to 23% from 12 yards and in, and 14% on 7 plays, 3 yards and in. So he'll get yardage, as he showed last week, but he'll be dependent on big plays to get his touchdowns. So even at $6,900, that hurts Cook's profile quite a bit. It's not quite as grim for ETN. His snap rate inside the 20 is 68%. It's actually 80% inside the 12, and he's played 2 out of 3 snaps, played 1 out of 2 snaps inside the 3. So he'll lose some work to Tank Bigsby, but Bigsby had some pretty costly mistakes in week 1. So I think the red zone role for ETN is not as bad as Cook's, and I'm more receptive to ETN at $8,000. Other guy worth flagging as a negative here is Javonte Williams. I think he's interesting this week, but his red zone share is 11%. His red zone snap rate is 26%. That does not disqualify him because his salary is low at 61, but it does hurt. So I want to talk to you about Cook specifically because he's the biggest red flag here. His role and his production have been pretty good so far, and his salary is nice at 69, but does this push him out of play for you? Knowing touchdowns will be tough, and any other takeaways from looking at the red zone workloads?
Yeah, I mean, we always struggle with Buffalo running backs. Shout out to Devin Single Digits. Maybe it's just a matter, like a function of the offense. Red zone, just touchdown opportunities are pretty limited with this team. That is something that we need to take account of. Curious where you have Dalvin Cook's number.
I don't care.
Okay.
Because I can get it for you, but like Dalvin Cook inside the red zone has a 50% rush share. I skipped over him when looking at the guys with 40% because I'm not going to use them, so why bother?
Okay.
Like Demon Pierce is 40%, but I'd rather get hit by a bus. So.
Okay. I was just curious. Because is Brees like gonna play for sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's been like limited in practice the past couple weeks, but I don't care. Like he's gonna play.
Yeah. I always lean on you for studying who never practices until Friday because
Dusty Cook.
But yeah, for James Cook, I don't think I can quite justify it, and it's a bit scary. Just in the sense
good.
of,
I think he's fine, as a player.
But then I know you like Dotson in this game. Is that the only?
I think Diggs is under salary. It's 8,000. You know how much I hate using Stephon Diggs.
You do,
But like I'd rather use a Monra. So I guess where's Gabe the Babe?
67.
That's a little high too.
I'd rather go Addison, frankly.
Probably. That might be my breaking point. I prefer like Michael Pittboy at 67. Sorry. See Pittman. Sorry. Pittman at 67. Than both those guys though. So
yeah.
I don't know. Let's move on to your second trend. You're talking about zone defense because we saw this in week 1. Justin Herbert facing the Dolphins, ADOT was low. Facing the Titans in week 2, his ADOT was the third highest it's been his entire career. So you're looking at the impact of defense and what it does to big plays in ADOT, because I think it's a very relevant topic. Go ahead.
Yeah, we always like whenever we find like league-wide or slate-wide trends rather than just team-specific stuff. This one I think is relevant. We've seen a substantial shift in recent seasons in terms of defenses just playing more zone coverage. It does matter. It does have an impact. So I want to start using it a little bit more, not as the end-all be-all or anything, but according to next-gen stats, zone coverage rates were around 65% in each season from 2018 to 2020. And then over the past 3 seasons, shot up to 69%, 71%, and now 72% to start this season. So we're trending toward, slightly a 6-year high, and that's just basically been climbing. Now, whenever I back tested the data and didn't account for like, is the team just generally good at defense or anything in the first place, there's a pretty clear relationship between the amount of zone coverage that you run and 2 specific stats: average depth of target allowed and expected completion percentage. So basically the quality of the throws that are, put out there against the defense. Now, I've tried and failed and tried and failed and tried and failed to look at stats and matchup data leading into games to try to predict when a wide receiver is going to break out. I did like past 1 game, past 2, 3, 4, all the different stats. It's really, really hard, and it comes down to who's maximizing their per target efficiency in a particular game. But with that said, if we can kind of learn 2 stats that are somewhat sticky, and those 2 stats are pretty relevant for, ADOT is tied to target volatility, and expected completion rate is just tied to, in-game catch rate. That stuff's important. I think it's pretty sick. So teams on the main slate running the highest percentage of zone defense so far this season. The Colts, they're getting the Ravens. Maybe bumps down Lamar a little bit for me if they kind of keep Lamar a little bit suppressed, a little more horizontal this week. The Packers against the Saints, not really relevant. The Vikings running a lot of zone. Don't love that. And not all of these teams so far have really low ADOTs allowed or anything. It's just what the data says is over a full year, it should sort of line up. Don't love that so much, but it's not going to get me away from the Chargers just because the game environment is going to trump the zone coverage numbers for me. The Jaguars against the Texans, don't really care about that. But the Bears against the Chiefs might be another reason that we can just kind of hope that the Chiefs don't erupt this week. But on the flip side, the highest rate of man defense so far, the Cowboys, not going to really make the Cardinals very playable, but the Chargers. So let's cook with my guy, Kirk Cousins. The Saints.
You could have said Justin Jefferson there and you chose Kirk Cousins.
It's called, it's subverting your expectation there.
You did. Congrats.
The Saints against the Packers. So maybe if you want to kind of take a swipe at some Packers receivers, probably a decent week to do it, but I'm not. The Falcons. So my guy, Sam Laporta, I don't know.
Oh, that's fair. No, yeah, that's fine.
And then the Chiefs.
You could have said like Marv or something. Like Marv and I probably would have left the stream, but yeah.
And then the Chiefs. I guess at some point we should just briefly discuss if there's any interest in Justin Fields just kind of popping off. But
I'll talk about the Chiefs in a second in my second trend, so we can do that there.
So to recap, the Chiefs and Chargers get some heavy zone teams. Don't love that. But the Vikings and the Lions get some man coverage teams. I think that helps. And 2 guys that I talked about having good value projections to begin with, Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff in the quarterback conversation. So what's sort of your overall thought on using just zone and man coverage as a process, but also what it means for this week?
Yeah, I think in general we should factor in defensive philosophy because as we saw with, again, I keep going back to this, but like Herbert in week 1, it matters. It does influence. I think it matters more with the Chargers than most because Kellen Moore seems to be willing to play things the way the opposing defense wants to, which also plays into the Joshua Kelly thing this week because if the Vikings play a lot of zone defense, Brian Flores says, F you, run on me, like that kind of thing, like that would lead itself to a lot of Joshua Kelly. So I think that's actually beneficial for Josh Kelly. So I think it matters in that regard. Only difference I have is I like to look at like the number of times the defense runs two high safeties, because that's kind of like the keep things underneath, dare you to run type approach. And that's one area where the Colts don't do it at all. Despite the fact they run a lot of zone defense, they don't run two high safeties hardly ever against Trevor Lawrence and CJ Stroud. And both those quarterbacks played pretty well in those games. So I have no concerns with Lamar in that regard, especially for a guy like Zay Flowers who can get some maybe downfield work. So no concerns there. I do think that overall, looking at air yards allowed per target, I mean, number one right there is the Titans facing Amari Cooper at 11.5. So, and like both Derek Carr and Justin Herbert had like outlier numbers in terms of their ADOT in their games facing the Titans. So I think that's actually pretty good for Cooper as well. But I think in general, we should put more stock into air yards allowed by opposing defenses, the philosophy of their defenses, stuff like that. And I think this is a good route to looking at it.
Yeah, because again, you're not going to be able to predict based on recent target shares, like who's going to catch,
right?
Have like a 40% catch rate over expectation, score twice on like, their limited targets. But if you're putting yourself in a position where a team should allow a higher catch rate, not just based on what they have allowed, but what they should probably be allowing downfield targets, like I think I need to use that more. So I'm going to try to track this better throughout the season.
Might need to add that to my sheet. I think it's a good call. Okay, let's talk about my second trend here, which is talking about the Cowboys and Chiefs as big favorites, because they've got the two highest implied totals on this slate, but they're both big favorites. And that leaves open the risk they could forego giving their studs big usage late to save them. We saw that in the Cowboys' first week where they blew out the Giants, and we didn't see a lot of CeeDee Lamb and Tony Pollard in that game. So I want to dig in to see how these teams have typically operated as big favorites in the past. Starting with the Chiefs, they've been favored by 7.5 or more points in 14 games since the start of 2021. It's a large sample on the Chiefs. That's almost a full season in the past 2 years. They're absurd. Only 5 of those games hit the over. 5 out of 14. A lot of that was due to the opponents. The Chiefs themselves averaged 27.6 points per game. Plenty enough to be appealing. Patrick Mahomes has, on average, exceeded his FanDuel point projection at numberFire. Thank you to you for pulling that data for me. He has historically outperformed that projection by 0.6 points. His pass attempts declined slightly from 38.3 in all games to 37.7 in this span. It's not a huge decrease, but enough. Rush attempts also declined a bit. He just makes up for it with efficiency through the air. Travis Kelce has underperformed his projection, though. So Kelce, with a salary this week, in the 8,000 range, $8,000, where we want to save salary, that might be a little bit tough to get to. Kelce at 13.2 FanDuel points per game versus 15 projected points. So Mahomes' key stacking partner gets dinged, and I would not be surprised if that applies to this week as well. Running back position is super spread out, and now Isaiah Pacheco is banged up. I think you could get to CEH or McKinnon if Pacheco is out, but that's not perfect either. So the Chiefs, kind of unappealing, even if Mahomes does tend to perform well in these situations. The Cowboys are different, though, at least at running back. Since the start of last year, the Cowboys have been favored by 7 or more points in 4 games. So a small sample, but Tony Pollard averaged 18.1 FanDuel points per game in those, and a lot of those were playing alongside Zeke. Zeke also outperformed expectations. So the running backs have been awesome despite the heavy spreads. Dak played to his projection. So did CeeDee Lamb, but the backs were fantastic. So that's kind of the one counterpoint to just me saying I want to get to Diggs or Hill or Jefferson in every lineup. Is Pollard probably going to do well despite the heavy spread? He gets a ton of red zone work. Last week against the Jets, that game didn't get out of hand really till the fourth quarter, but like he played a lot in that game. The rest of both these teams is fine at best, though. So how are you feeling about the Chiefs and Cowboys in this spot?
Yeah, I hate to do this to my Chiefs, but they're still just basically Mahomes and Kelce at this point. And if I'm not 100% sold on them, and you could really say that about like any team. It was like, oh, they have their quarterback and maybe someone else. But we talked about their like tertiary and quaternary options, and they're not really appealing to us. Maybe Pacheco if you kind of want to get access to this game in different ways, sure.
If he's full by Friday, yeah.
But like, I'm not that tempted. I haven't really seen a lot on Travis Kelce's workload and if it's going to be completely full.
Yeah, he was subbing out quite a bit in week 2. Like, he still got a lot of targets, but like he was very clearly not 100%.
Yeah, I guess he wasn't on the. Well, he's not even showing up here for me, but on the injury report or the practice report. But yeah, the route rate was 55%. We know we got targets, but you want him on the field at this salary. So, and also if he comes out on the field and limited snaps and he's getting just peppered, it makes it a little bit easier to account for him on a particular play. But I think I'm out. I think the best play of either team here, like you said, is Tony Pollard. We historically allocate a lot of salary to running backs. We just haven't had a lot of running backs on the slates with great workloads and great matchups. Unless Pollard just is limited to like a 60%, like 65, 70% snap rate, even across close games, then he's over salary in that sense. But I don't really view it that way. He was really involved in the first half of week 1, although that was a complete blowout. So I think that Pollard is the best case against selling out for Jefferson, Hill, Kelce this week.
I give you 100 lineups. How many Jefferson? How many Hill? How many Pollard? Assuming you cannot make both, you can. I think you can fit 2 in one lineup if you work hard enough. Let's assume you can't use 2 in one lineup. How are you allocating those 100?
Probably like 40, 40, 20 with a 20 on Hill.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I was thinking 50, 40, 10 with Jefferson 50, 40 Hill, 10 Pollard.
Interesting.
Maybe I should be higher on Pollard. Like, I had him in my player picks initially, and then I changed it. But like, I probably should be higher on Pollard. You're right.
It's one of those. It's one of those situations where it's really easy to get tempted by the value backs, but a lot of these guys are going to give us like
you're right.
12 points.
You're right. So 50, 25, 25. How about that? Dramatic shift for me. But like,
with 50 on Pollard now?
No, 50 Jefferson.
Okay.
Just splitting up Hill a bit.
Okay. All right.
But you're probably going to have one of each of those guys in every lineup, right?
I don't know how you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I know how you don't. It's easy not to.
I think you make it work. Just find a way. Love finds a way. And I love Tony Pollard, Justin Jefferson, and Tyreek Hill.
Yeah.
Okay. Weather for this week, as alluded to before, most of the wind is in games that we don't like anyway. So there are 5 games right now on a 12-game main slate with wind speeds of 10 plus miles per hour. First one is Colts and Ravens. That's kind of a bummer. But Lamar's played in wind a lot and hasn't been a huge detriment for him. So I'm still okay with that one, but I would note it for Michael Pittman, for Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, et cetera, et cetera. Still do like them, but keep an eye on the win there. Other ones, Bills at Commanders, Titans at Browns, Saints, Packers, Patriots, Jets. Right now, nothing above 15 miles per hour, but I would check back on that later because it could be a downgrade to my Amari Cooper plans. Stuff like that. But I would check back on those later. Colts and Ravens, the most noteworthy one with some potential weather there. Let's now go position by position and break down our favorite FanDuel plays for week number 3. Starting off with you, Brandon, at quarterback. Which guys are you prioritizing in week number 3?
I'm going Lamar, $8,200 salary against the Colts. 2 very different games so far for him. In week 1 without Mark Andrews, 22 attempts, 169 yards, terrible EPA numbers, really, really low ADOT against the Houston team that is second right now in ADOT allowed. But in week 2, opened it up, threw it downfield more with Andrews back, 237 yards and 2 touchdowns, great EPA numbers, run the ball, 54 yards. If there's even more injuries in this backfield, just more reason to think that Lamar continues to run and finally gets into the end zone. And yeah, it's just a good overall matchup. Colts 26th in completion rate over expectation allowed, and allowing a high A dot as well. And then I love Kirk Cousins. I'm sticking with it. $7,800 salary. Talked about like the odds of $7,000 quarterbacks getting you 25 plus FanDuel points. It's noticeably lower than guys with salaries that are higher than this, but in the right matchups, which he has, the rate does go up. And Cousins, just frankly, this game, high pace, high pass rate, I just love it, and we know who to stack him with, at least primarily and secondarily. But just the best game of the week. Chargers, not a good pass defense, allowing a ton of downfield work, not stopping the downfield work, just not going to overthink it. I know he has to maximize his efficiency, but I don't really see a way that this game is. I talk about visualizing the scoreboard at the end of the first quarter and having it be like 0-0 or 3-0. I don't really see that one happening this week.
We say that a lot with Chargers games specifically,
but
I don't think so for this week. I agree with that. My first love at quarterback is also Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson facing the Colts this week, $8,200. And Jackson looked good last week, not to be like a tape bro, but he looked good, I thought, last week. Teams have been able to move the ball pretty effectively against the Colts so far this year. And those quarterbacks have been Trevor Lawrence, who's very good, but then CJ Stroud, who I thought looked good, but I like CJ Stroud, but did he look good because he's CJ Stroud or because of the Colts? He didn't have his left tackle. Lamar probably won't have his left tackle this week either. So I think we can attack this defense. Lamar in a game where the spread is tight enough to imply it won't be a total blowout, and he's the one guy in a good spot who can run a bit, and I think that's pretty appealing for this week. My second love, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to go Jared Goff.
Yeah.
I'm going to audible on the fly. I had Herbert in there, and I do like Herbert. I think he's very fun now that they're willing to let him rip it a bit. But it's a situation where we're willing to use quarterbacks who don't run this week. One of them and Kirk Cousins will likely have a very high roster rate. Jared Goff probably will not because people justifiably are not super on him. This would change if Amon-Ra St. Brown can't go, by the way. I would not be as on Goff in that situation, but Goff facing the Falcons, defense hasn't really been tested as of yet. I have them projected to rank 29th in pass defense for this week. Not factoring in matchup, just accounting for injuries and stuff like that. So very bad pass defense. I don't see a lot of differences between him and Kirk Cousins. So pace is different. You're right there. But I think there are enough similarities where I'm okay pivoting to Jared Goff in single entry in order to make my lineups different, save some salary and stuff like that. It could be very dumb and it could work against me, but whatever. I've made dumber plays in my past.
I'm just going to say on Goff sounds like French for being way too hyped on someone. So.
Is it French for being way too hyped on someone or being in vogue? Because I'm going to go with in vogue.
I don't know.
Hater. Let's go to running back. Who stands out to you there?
I'm going Pollard. Yes, we have a lot of value backs, but if they're, like I said, I'm trying not to look at salary and say, oh, I want to play this player because of this salary. I want to play players because I really want to play them and then only not play them if they're egregiously oversalaried. Mm-hmm. As far as Pollard goes, he's kind of the one featured back, true featured back without any real concerns. The biggest concern is the blowout. And it's just, I'm not always going to look at a large spread and say, oh, this is a blowout where he's not going to play in the second half. The Cardinals are a little bit scrappy, at least. And so that could mean that Pollard plays a full game. 63% snap rate for him on the season, but in the first half, it's over 70%, including an 81% first half snap rate in week 1. Arizona's been kind of decent against the rush. I'm not going to put too much stock into that, but they've let up 8 catches on 10 targets and 2 touchdowns to backs out of the backfield. Really small sample, hard to know what to do with that, but I don't really envision a way that Tony Pollard escapes this game without production. It's just going to kind of flow through him to some large degree. Second love, assuming David Montgomery's out, it's going to be Jibreel Gibbs. Love the salary at $7,000. Gibbs, the rushing metrics so far, like I said, not as good as I would have thought based on how explosive he kind of looks. But Atlanta's just kind of average against the rush so far this season. And Gibbs, we know, like, as the sample grows, he's going to look really good. 48% snap rate last week, not accounting for the fact that Montgomery left early. I think you had him at, 17 out of 27 snaps?
So they played on the field at the same time for a couple. I did not count up total snaps, but it was 17-10 favoring Gibbs, but I believe they were on the field for a couple of plays overlapping.
Because they'll put Gibbs on the field, do some stuff with him. But 7 catches, 9 targets, 57% route rate, and as I mentioned already, just the second highest target per route rate among running backs. You gotta love to see that, with room to grow for his role. And then third love, it probably should be Raheem Mostert over Zach Moss, but I think Zach Moss works, especially because we want to play Lamar and bring it back to some degree. But just a really hard role to nitpick with what he had in week 2. 98% snap rate. It was 55 total snaps, 18 carries, 4 targets, over 100 scrimmage yards. Baltimore's rush defense, from a success rate basis, which is my favorite metric, especially early in the season, because it just, that sample grows and grows and grows with every carry, and doesn't get blown up one way or the other with long rushes or like fumbles, anything like that. So I think Moss is I don't want to say a safe play, but he feels like a pretty safe play with his workload and that salary.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also have Gibbs and Moss in mind. So I'll make the case for Raheem Mostert in a second, but let's start with Gibbs. Again, it's just like, this is the kind of profile we want for a running back, where they catch passes. They're in a fantastic game. The spread is relatively tight. That checks all the key boxes for me at running back. And Gibbs does all that. 9 targets last week. He had a 48% snap rate, even with Montgomery playing most of that game. Now, I would expect Craig Reynolds and Zonovan Knight to frustrate us at some point on Sunday, but I just want backs who catch passes, even on FanDuel, a half PPR site. It is smart to use running backs who catch passes. So I like Gibbs a lot, and I think it's wise to use him, even though we know there are paths to disappointment here. I have Moss as my second player pick when we talk about Raheem Mostert and kind of the appeal in him. Playing a lot of snaps. He's in an offense we want to use. Potentially could get a bit more work in the passing game if there's no Jalen Waddle. And I feel like we've seen enough from him relative to the rest of the backfield. Savon Ahmed is banged up. They have not trusted Devon Achane as of yet. Mostert has some burners still, despite the fact he is 79 years old. So Mostert, to me, I think is appealing. I probably lean him a hair over Moss. I think you talked me into that as being like the better play. But I do like both those guys for this week. I think my favorite value for this week is going to wind up being Joshua Kelly. Kelly's salary is $6,100. If we assume Austin Eckler does sit once again, it's kind of hard not to like Kelly. He played a bunch of snaps last week and ran a ton of routes, but just had a tough match for the Titans. And he gets the Vikings this time around. Brian Flores is similar to Vic Fangio, where he wants you to run the ball against him. The rush defense of the Vikings has been awful so far this year, which is why DeAndre Swift was able to go for 16,000 yards against them last week. So Kelly, salary comes down, gets a better matchup, played a lot of snaps last week. I feel like it makes sense to go back to him despite the disappointment last week. But again, relative to expectations, I wouldn't view it as being a downgrade, just kind of a situation where he was in a bad matchup, much better matchup, low salaried exposure to this game. So Joshua Kelly, to me, I think deserves to be our top value play for week number 3. Let's move now to wide receiver, Brandon. When you look at wide receiver for week number 3, which guys are you trying to target this week?
I'm on Ross St. Brown. Just love him as a player. And I think that there's clear reasons to think that his workload gets just better throughout the year. 24% target share, so 8 targets per game, 86.5 yards per game so far. Again, could definitely be better for someone as good as he is, but take David Montgomery off the field. They got him a lot of work whenever he was, on the field. I feel like a few extra passes go to St. Brown.
To throw more too, because Montgomery is like a decent runner, and that might just not have the ability to run, which is part of why I like Goff too.
Yeah, so some extra plays going to St. Brown. Atlanta has limited downfield passing so far, but running a lot of man, should have a good matchup across the board because he's just very good as long as he's healthy. So really check in on St. Brown's health throughout the week. Second love, someone who's going to be hard to fit my lineups potentially, but I think deserves some attention in terms of like mini stack potential. And a quarterback we haven't really discussed is Trevor Lawrence, but Calvin Ridley, again, I talked about not loving receivers in one-off situations. I don't think that this is a true one-off situation. I think there are ways that you can bring it back.
Multiple.
Yeah, with Houston, but Ridley at a $7,500 salary is really appealing. 26% target share, 40% air yard share in this offense, 5 downfield targets per game. If you get into 2.5 red zone targets per game, so I like to weight targets a little bit extra if they're downfield or if they're in the red zone. And if you do that for like the average FanDuel points that are, tied to those, he has a weighted target total of 14.5 targets per game, which would rank him 4th among receivers on the main slate behind Tyreek Hill, who's at 17.7, Justin Jefferson, who's at 16.5, and then Chris Olave, who's just ahead of him at 14.6. But Ridley, pretty solid matchup here. I think that he easily could be a top 3 wideout on this slate. Not that that should surprise anyone based on his salary, but don't want to overlook him. My third love, I'm going to say Michael Thomas here. $5,800 salary against the Packers. In 2 games with Derek Carr under center, Thomas is at a 25.4% target share. It's 8.5 per game. Pretty respectable ADOT of 9.5 yards. He's getting some downfield looks, getting red zone looks. He's got 2 red zone looks per game. It's 11.5 weighted targets. Not a great matchup, but a low salary. And I would not be surprised if, he has a multi-touchdown game at some point just because of what he can do. And it seems like he has a bit of a rapport with Carr so far.
Yeah, I've liked what I've seen so far from him. Like he looks fine too. Thomas or Dotson at the same salary?
I'm gonna say Thomas is my preferred play.
Mm-hmm.
However, I might wind up with more Dotson because of the game environment.
I think that's
kind of a cop out, but I think it's true.
That's where I settle in as well. Like, I think Dotson has a bigger path to playing in a shootout, which is appealing. So I think both are fine. I like Thomas, but I think I lean towards Dotson there. My first lever receiver is Justin Jefferson. He stacks well with Joshua Kelly. That's the main appeal of Justin Jefferson. Nothing else is appealing about him, just that he stacks well with Joshua Kelly at running back. But if I'm talking about Jefferson versus Tyreek Hill, Jefferson is indoors, higher total, tighter spread. I still think Hill is in that tier, obviously, but like if I'm choosing between the two, I should probably go with the factors I care a lot about, which is those. 29% target share so far with Jefferson. He has 46% of the deep work, and this is the big thing. I love guys who can get me 20 points without a touchdown because it's basically Christian McCaffrey and nobody else. But Justin Jefferson, 0 touchdowns so far this year, has 19.4 and 19.5 FanDuel points. Oh, buddy. I think we're on, like, he's going to drop a 40 burger within the next month, and it might be on Sunday. So I like Jefferson a lot.
Two quick things. He was the poster boy for regression this year to score more. He hasn't scored yet through 2 games. Tyreek Hill has 3 touchdowns through 2 games. At some point, Justin Jefferson's going to score.
Over under 40 FanDuel points for Jefferson on Sunday.
It's a little high. I'd say slightly under.
Okay. Hater. My second one is Nico Collins. They're pretty big underdogs, and as you know, we don't like chasing this, but I think the Texans should be able to move the football here pretty well. Collins so far has 10 targets per game with a 45% deep target share. I think he and CJ Stroud look really good together. Like I was watching that game back mostly for Zach Moss stuff, but like they looked like they had
watching film.
I know, I'm the worst. But like you are chasing a negative script, but I think it's fine in the situation. I also don't mind Tank Dell at 54. I think you could consider Robert Woods too. Like, will you hate yourself? Yes. Should you hate yourself? Probably. But like, it's 58. He got a lot of targets super late in that game, so I don't think his target total was fully indicative of his role. But like, Nico is fun. Stacks pretty well if you want to go with Calvin Ridley, which I think is a good call, or Travis Etienne, who's also a guy we probably haven't discussed enough on the show. So I like Collins and then potentially Tank Dell. My third love is Amari Cooper. Of course, did not practice Wednesday, so keep tabs on that. But he has a 25% target share in 2 games. He has 44% of the deep targets, which is 3.4 deep targets per game. So Deshaun sucks, but he's degaffing it, which is fine. Like, that helps. Cooper, a 29% red zone target share, facing the Titans, who funnel a lot of work towards the pass. Maybe if people are using Drome Ford, they won't use Amari Cooper. So I think he's pretty appealing. Of the guys in the low total games, I think Cooper is my favorite wide receiver for this week. Tight end, what are you focusing on there?
Love Hawkinson. Want to get some Kelsey somehow, some way, but if I'm picking one, it's going to be Mark Andrews. The return in week 2 could have gone better, but 82% route rate, 8 targets on 27 routes, 45 yards and a touchdown, but a really low catch rate over expectation, minus 13.8 points. So it's a really good target share. One of the highest target per route rate numbers for a tight end. I know it's just one game, but that's going to stay elevated. And the Colts have kind of let up some extra catches to the position. And so, again, we talked last week about tight end upside with Kelsey and Andrews on the slate. That's still true. It's hard to remember all of these things and really focus on this stuff, but these guys can have 20-point games, and really no other tight ends can, and that matters. And the salary of 7,400, very reasonable. Another name in that Texans game that I don't mind is Dalton Schultz, just because if you're not playing one of the 3 studs at tight end, might as well save some salary. $4,800 salary for Dalton Schultz. Results not great, 19 yards per game, but 5.5 targets per game. Catch rate over expectation of minus 15.4%. I think he's like decent as a tight end, and he's getting some work. He's on the field. They should be passing a lot and getting some downfield work. 3 downfield targets out of 11 total targets. So that's tied for 5th among targets who were active, or tight ends who were active in both games so far. So could do a lot worse if you're not rostering one of the big 3 this week.
Yeah, I prefer Durham Smythe at 48, but I think that Schultz is fully defensible, so no pushback from me there. My first love is also Mark Andrews. Salary came down to 74 for this week. He led the Ravens with 8 targets this past week. He didn't go nuts, but he, Kelsey, and Hawkinson are all in the same tier from a projection perspective, and Andrews has the lowest salary and not as good of a game environment as Hawkinson, but still pretty good. Andrews lowest salary of the bunch, so I like Andrews a lot, especially because I will have a lot of Lamar, so I will inherently have a lot of Andrews as well. My second love is Sam Laporta, $5,200. It's lowest salaried access to a good game. I think if you're talking about guys who get you that this week, it's kind of Joshua Kelly, Sam Laporta. Gibbs is probably undersalaried, not low salary, but undersalaried. And then the quarterbacks with Goff and Cousins. So it's not a huge number of guys who get you there, but Laporta's one. 17% target share across 2 games. He's shown some yardage juice, which I do like as well. So I think Laporta is my favorite lower salary tight end for week 3. Defense, your favorite. What you got there?
I prefer yours, but because we only pick one, I figured I'd at least mix it up. I'm going to go with the Jets. 39. I know that they're home underdogs, but I'm not afraid of the New England offense at all. They're 26th in adjusted passing offense, according to numberFire's metrics. Don't mind the Browns either at 43, but below 4,000, I think it's the Jets and then another AFC East team that you're about to talk about.
That's the Miami Dolphins taking on the Denver Broncos, whose offense is weird. That's the word I'll use for it. I know they put up some points, but they've looked odd doing it. Dolphins are favored. They're at home. They've got a good pass rush. They've got a good defensive, very smart defensive coordinator in Brandon. Most important piece, it is a Vic Fangio revenge game facing off against his former employer in the Denver Broncos. What more could you possibly want? I also don't mind the Titans, the Chargers, the Vikings when I'm not using Chargers and Vikings, because pace benefits or defenses benefit from pace as well. So if I'm not using Kelly, Jefferson in the 5 lineups out of 1,600 I do, I'll go to Chargers or Vikings. But
yeah, quick reminder, majority of FanDuel points come from sacks and turnovers. So
and Russell Wilson will occasionally give up both those. So that's the Dolphins' appeal in them. And of course, again, the Vic Fangio revenge game. Any final thoughts from you, Brandon, as we wrap up things for week number 3 in DFS?
I think the thing that stands out to me yet again, we're going to have some slates that don't really fit this, and there's going to be pretty obvious narrow ways that you have to build, but there's a lot of ways you can go. You can build around like Pollard and Bijan and be low on the receivers. You can like be different. You're not going to get too many weeks where you're being different by playing like Mahomes and Josh Allen. So a lot of different ways to go. I think that I need to get access to the receivers, make sure I get some Tony Pollard. But other than that, really narrow down the value running backs that I am most comfortable with. So again, like you would say, yep. You can say rank them?
Yep.
All right.
Just
do a podcast.
I know, right? This is year 8 or whatever. No, It's our 9th NFL season. So yeah, 9 years of doing a podcast together. Figured out not 9 years, 9 NFL seasons doing a podcast together. We've figured each other out. I think you want to go through the value running backs after all the data is in as far as injury reports and stuff like that. So figure out where we are on Kendre Miller. Again, I want to bring his name up one more time. Read the reports on what his expected workload is for the Saints. Can you justify him at 46? Dig into expectations for Jibreel Gibbs. Try to pin down whether Javonte Williams' workload will go up. Will Drome Ford get pass catching work? There's still a lot of data left to be brought in this week. Once that data is all in, then hand rank them and decide priorities among the value backs, because you can probably cross off some of the ones you don't feel as good about. Like maybe you cross off Drome Ford, maybe you cross off Isaiah Pacheco, anyone else like that. So taking that data, hand rank them, and go from there. That is all that we have here for this week on the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. As mentioned, though, UFC and MLB also in the same podcast feed. Find those by searching for the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Wherever you get your podcast, you can also find the NFL podcast on the FanDuel YouTube page and on FanDuel TV Plus. If you want some betting insights for Thursday night's game, Tom Vecchio previewed that with Primetime Tom, talking 49ers and Giants. That's in the Covering the Spread podcast feed and FanDuel TV Plus. And then also we'll have our week 3 NFL betting show later on today on Thursday with myself and Dr. Ed Feng. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm on Twitter at Gdula13, GDULA13.
Kind of scared myself with how loud I said it, so I said it twice. I'm on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow FanDuel Research at FanDuel Research. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your NFL DFS lineups for week number 3. We'll talk to you once again on Monday to wrap it all up. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.